What is going on YouTube and Diablo fans? My name's Andreas and as always welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, R.I.P to the Hammerdin and hello to the Miasma Warlock. Or the Abyss Warlock, however you want to call it. I will be calling it the Miasma Warlock because you use more than just the Abyss skill for this build, so I will refer to it as the Miasma Warlock. So we have a new kid on the block, and that is this Miasma Warlock. And I think in many ways it is comparable to the Hammerdin in terms of its damage output, its survivability, its viability, and the areas that it can farm. And importantly to note, this character uses magic damage, so the type of damage is magic, and that is an important thing to note for these Miasma skills, because there aren't a lot of monsters that have inherent magic resistance in the game or can be immune to magic damage. So this means you can farm most areas in the game very effectively, and that's what makes this character very comparable to the Hammerdin, as well as its sort of damage output, clear speeds, its survivability, and just in general sort of where you can farm and how it plays within the meta of Diablo 2 Resurrected. So focusing on this build and this hero in particular, we deal magic damage. We are a caster, we are very tanky, we rely on Enigma to be as effective as possible, and we are also in the A+ to S tier in terms of ranking where this build sits in the whole meta and all of that, at least in my opinion. So what are the reasons that you would play this kind of build, and this build in particular? So firstly for me is that fact that you can farm every area in the game, just about. There are a few small exceptions to this rule, but you can basically farm anywhere in the game using these Miasma skills, and they are very powerful and very effective at killing your enemies and avoiding any sort of immunes and any sorts of monsters that have a high resistance to magic. So that is probably its biggest appeal for this build, is its sort of adaptability and ability to farm anywhere in the game. Then next to that, I personally find this build a lot more fun than the Echoing Strike Warlock. It is a lot more engaging to play, technical to play. It takes a little bit more skill to play it, and its general playstyle is just a bit more exciting in my personal opinion than the Echoing Strike Warlock. So for me, that is a big attraction to this build, is it just plays so dynamically and so fun, and it's just a great overall feel to the character. And lastly, I think that there are so many new exciting items that relate to magic damage and magic skills in particular. So for instance, I'm trying to think what I have on my Warlock right now. Sling Ring, for instance, it's got that minus to enemy magic resistance. We have that Geed's Wager, the new belt. We have the Opal Vein ring. We have the Hull Warden's helm. We have the Ars Mephistos tome, that also has minus to enemy magic resistance. So we've got all of these exciting new items that we haven't got to play with before, that now we have the opportunity to with the Miasma Warlock. So you could also use some of these items for the Hammerdin, but in particular I think it's fun playing with these items with the Miasma Warlock. So moving on to the build. So if we have a look at our skill tree here, we will start off with the Chaos skill tree, because that is where all of our Miasma skills are, and that is where we will focus most of our points. So the first thing you want to do is max out everything on the right hand side here. That is your Miasma Bolt, which is a range sort of skill. I'll quickly just show you these skills. So Miasma Bolt is a ranged projectile, and when it hits enemies, that will leave behind a pool of miasma that ticks for damage over time. So this is an effective little skill just to add some extra damage to your rotation, and is a very cool and useful skill whilst leveling. If you see over here, you can see that pool of miasma that it leaves behind that will deal damage over time. I think visually that's stunning, looks very cool, looks very dark and ominous, fits the whole Warlock theme very nicely. So next up we have Miasma Chains, and this is a very exciting skill and probably one of my favorite of the Warlocks, that you can cast out and move along the screen, and these will sort of follow where you move, and you are able then to catch enemies within these miasma chains and do damage to them, as well as damage over time with that miasma cloud that it leaves behind. So you max out miasma bolt, miasma chain, and then you have enhance entropy, and this is a passive skill and a synergistic skill to our other miasma skills, and that adds a longer duration to that damage over time that our miasma skills do with the clouds of damage that they leave behind. And it also makes the radius of our abyss even larger. So I'll quickly show you abyss, and I think it's an awesome looking skill, and it is twofold in the sense that it has very strong crowd control and a sort of pull effect that will draw enemies into the abyss that you cast, as well as dealing a whole ton of damage. And this can be cast anywhere within range on your screen. It does have a bit of a casting delay, and it is around for a couple seconds, but I'll show you in the gameplay portion of this video how that all comes together. So in terms of the skill tree, you're going to want to put 20 hard points into all of these skills on the right hand side of your chaos skill tree, and then personally you could put a point into sigil death or sigil lethargy. I personally just think 1 point into sigil lethargy is a great 1-point wonder for extra crowd control, and a bit of a combo where you lay down sigil lethargy and an abyss in the middle, and that will sort of suck all the enemies into the sigil lethargy and then keep them there because of the slow effect of sigil lethargy. So it's a nice little combo. Or you could do the same similar combo with sigil death and abyss, and then draw them in to then sort of make a concentrated corpse explosion. So a point into either one of these is beneficial in my opinion. I personally prefer sigil lethargy, and that's what I'm going with, and then you don't also need to put another extra 2 skill points to get to sigil death. And I think sigil death has its use cases, but personally I just prefer the playstyle of lethargy. Then in terms of the Eldritch skill tree, so we've already used 80 odd points on our chaos skill tree. So then in our Eldritch skill tree, I put 1 point into levitation mastery, just in case you're using a weapon and would like the requirements of that weapon to be lowered, or for instance if you are using a dagger type weapon and it has quite high dex requirements or stuff like that, then that's levitation mastery will reduce the requirements for that. And lastly, it's just a 1 point wonder in my opinion for saving you a bit of stat points, and in that effect some value when distributing your points. I also put 1 into Psychic Ward, sort of as a extra line of defense, as well as a anti-one-shotter skill, so to help you not get one-shotted, which isn't really a high possibility or likelihood because of how tanky the Warlock is, but it still, just in my opinion, can be useful sometimes. I don't think it's 100% necessary. If I was playing hardcore, I would definitely put 1 point into this. For softcore it's not really necessary, but you can if you would like to. But I do recommend 1 point into levitation mastery unless you know specifically what gear you need and what the requirements are, and then you can judge if you need it or not. Personally, I like 1 point into it. Then lastly, for the demon skill tree, we have 1 point into every skill in the skill tree, and that is so that we can get to our bind demon as well as our consume, and we'll put 1 point into every one of these, and then we will put enough into Demonic Mastery so that with our gear we can summon 3 demons. So you need, with your gear, at least 20 points into Demonic Mastery in order to get our 3 demons that we need for this build. And just quickly getting into that, you will have a Summon Defiler which you then consume, and consuming this Defiler will give you, if we just check here quickly, so let's just put consume on our bar. So if we consume so if we consume our Defiler, we get -10 to enemy magic resistance as well as 20 to magic skill damage. So that is a huge damage buff to our build by just consuming 1 Defiler. So we can go ahead and consume that and we'll get a massive boost in damage. Then we will consume 1 Defiler and then we will summon another one just to bind souls together to do more damage in an AoE effect. So we summon 1 Defiler and consume it, we keep 1 up to deal extra AoE damage, and then we have a Bound Demon to be an extra layer of defense in terms of another tank for us. So alongside our mercenary we will have that Bound Demon as an extra tank, and you can get some useful auras on him such as Holy Frost or even Fanaticism to give your Merc extra perks, and you can just generally get some good utility off of your Bound Demon. So after we've put enough points into Demonic Mastery, we will then put the remainder of our points into Blood Oath in order to share as much damage between ourselves with our Bound Demon to make us as tanky as possible. And that is going to be where we dump the rest of our points in this build. You could also go with Consume. Personally, I find more value out of sharing more damage with your demon through Blood Oath. So now we're going to have a look at the gear quickly, and I just want to note whilst I am showing you the gear that this isn't by any means perfect gear. I have just put this together kind of with what gear I have on my, or had on my Echoing Strike Warlock, and I've now just shifted it across and used what I have found along my journey playing Echoing Strike and Fire Warlock, and I've used that now for this Miasma build. So just quickly selling some items to make some space before I show you some gameplay. That's an interesting set of gloves, no attack speed, which isn't great, but otherwise interesting. Anyway, moving on to the gear section of this build guide. So I am using Obsession, which I think is probably the second best option to use as a weapon for this build, because it is just a huge chunky stat stick full of all the useful damaging and defensive attributes and affixes that you need. So as an all-rounder item, this is fantastic because it gives you a huge increase to your max life, a huge amount of resistances, a huge amount of faster cast rate, and 4 to all skills. But I do think that for min-maxing purposes and what I'm personally working towards, I do have a ring over here that I have an offer for roughly a bear rune at the moment, and that is going to allow me to buy a Zod, which I will then make a void rune word within this stiletto dagger. So that's a 3 to abyss dagger that I'll then make void, and void is, in my opinion, probably the best in slot weapon in terms of damage and in terms of min-maxing this character for the most efficacy in terms of both damage output and survivability. So I am going to be going with the void, which I think is best in slot. We then have your offhand or shield option. I think going through the game, a lidless wall is great, or even a spirit, but I think as your ultimate option in terms of best in slot and end game option, a well-rolled Arsdal Mephistos Occult Tome with an rune will probably be your best in slot. Then for helm, you can either go with a Shaker, which will then be socketed with that new magic jewel, so one of those new Uber Ancient's jewels, the magic version of that. I currently still have my Echoing Strike set up here with enhanced damage and physical damage, but you will put the magic jewel in your helm, so either in a Shaco or a 220 circlet would be your best in slot here, and I think a 220 circlet can possibly edge out over Shaco, but it would need the right rolls in order to do so. Then moving on from Shaco, an Enigma is really important for this build. I mean, firstly, it just has all these useful stats that are strength, the 2 skills, the faster run walk, the magic find, all of that really useful stuff, as well as the teleport, and teleport becomes a key skill for this build to function optimally, in my opinion, and I'll show you that more in the gameplay portion of this video and the how do you play this character part of the video. So Enigma is not essential for the playthrough and getting into endgame, but once you do start pushing to have best in slot gear, Enigma is an absolute no-brainer and by far the best in slot item for your chest piece. So then for your amulet, I think a 220 or 210 even amulet is a really good option, and failing that, a Mars with the extra resist that it gives you as well as the 2 skills is also a fantastic option. So you can either get a 220, you can get a Mars, or maybe even a 310 or a 3100, which is, you know, 100 life and 3 to KO skills, or 10 faster cast rate, 3 to KO skills, something along those lines. I don't know if I'm thinking about Project Diablo now with 10 faster cast rate, 3 to KO skills, but I do think you can get it in Diablo 2 Resurrected. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So after the amulet, we can then take a look at our, what are we looking at now? Our gloves, which I just think Trangul's is the best in slot here because there's nothing else that is really important that can go on the glove slot for us other than something that gives us cast rate, and Trangs gives us cast rate and cold resist, where Mage Fist only basically gives us that cast rate. So I think Trangs is best in slot for this option, or the glove option for your gear. Then in terms of boots, the Wraith Step boots, so these boots I just haven't spec'd in order to be able to use them yet in terms of strength, but the Wraith Step mirrored boots, I think with 1 to KO skills, is probably best in slot for this build, and it also gives you that faster hit recovery, faster run walk, and a bit of stats, which is useful. Failing a Wraith Step, I think that a Horizon's Legacy boots with that cannot be frozen, as well as magic resistance, because if you use a magic Sundered Charm, you will want to bring your magic resistance back up, which means Horizons would be a great choice for this, as well as the stats that it provides. Then moving on to your belt, I think that very likely Geed's Wager, which is the new belt that will give you faster cast rate, as well as all resist and -2 enemy magic resistance, I think that will probably be your best in slot, but Arachnid Mesh will be on par, maybe just a step below that, so it's kind of up to you what you choose to use, but one of those caster belts between Geed's Wager or Arachnid Mesh would be best in this slot. Lastly, for your rings, I think the combination of a sling ring as well as an opal vein, which I don't have, would maybe be ideal because of the faster cast rate it provides, as well as that -2 enemy magic resistance and magic damage that those provide. So I think the combo of a sling ring and an opal vein with magic damage would possibly be best. I just have a wisp projector on here because I don't have a better ring to put on the slot at the moment. Like I said, I'm by no means optimized in the setup. I think another option would be an opal vein as well as a Stone of Jordan. That is likely the option that I'm going to go for, and possibly even an opal vein ring as well as a faster cast rate ring with some other useful stats that could also be a great option for this build. And in terms of what you would want in your inventory, you would need the obligatory Warlock Torch as well as an Annihilus Charm, a Geeds, then the rest you would fill up with Chaos Skillers, and then lastly one of those magic Sundered Charms, the magic renewed Sundered Charms, and then you can just do various other small charms to fill in any gaps of light of resistances, or even just magic find, or whatever you find useful you can fill up with small charms. So it would be a skill of an inventory of chaos skillers, a Geeds, Annie, Torch, and then a renewed magic Sundered Charm. So that is our character. On Switch you would have your call to arms and either a spirit or a lidless wall depending on your strength requirements. And getting into your sort of stats, I would put just enough strength for the gear. So I'm a little under strength at the moment because I only have base value of strength points. I didn't put any points into strength, all of them into vitality, but I do want to use Wraith Step and a spirit for my offhand, in which case I will add a couple points into strength just to reach that value, and then the rest would go into vitality. So at the moment I'm very much overcapped on resistances. I will sort that out when I optimize a bit better. I've got about 310% magic find. I've got 155% faster cast rate, which is 30 more than you do need, but I am going to be making some changes there. So I'm a bit sort of overcapped at the moment, and I have minus 20 to enemy magic resistance and minus oh, that doesn't matter, that's the physical resistance. But anyway, I have minus 20 to the magic resistance, and then I also, that is between my Sling Ring and my Arsdal Mephistos, and then once you consume your Defiler, that will then further that, and once I optimize the gear it will be even better. Then I also just, in terms of gearing, we have our Merc, and I think because of the mana hungry nature of this character, I think that Insight is your best in slot for your Merc in terms of just maintaining and managing your mana and just having a smooth sort of gameplay and just general feeling of the character. Insight definitely works best there. I have seen suggestions of an Ethereal Breath of the Dying here, as well as a Fortitude and an Andes. Personally, I think an Insight with a Cure Helm and then either a Treachery or Fortitude or even Chains of Honor, probably Chains of Honor, would be a good combination. So Cure Helm, Chains of Honor, and Insight. I think that would probably be your best in slot for your Merc for this particular build. And then in terms of your Bound Demon, there are no demons that can pump up your magic damage other than consuming your Defiler. So for your Bound Demon, you can get basically something with Holy Freeze just to get that extra CC. You can get something with Might for your Merc if you don't have a Might Merc already. You can get Fanaticism to speed up the Bound Demon's attack speed as well as your Merc. Really, you can do whatever works for you. I think just something tanky and with a useful aura, that is what you're aiming for with your Bound Demon. It's sort of not as powerful on this build as it is on the Fire Warlock or the Blood Boil Warlock or even Echoing Strike or something like that. So that is the gear, the stats, the skill distribution, all of that good stuff. And I think now we're just going to jump into the gameplay, how we buff this character up, and then just how it all fits together and how it all works. So I think let's just jump into a quick chaos run here just to show you what's going on. So what I'll do is switch over to my call to arms and my lidless wall. I'll then do my battle orders and battle command. I'll switch back to my main hand. I'll put on my psychic ward. I'll then summon a Defiler, and then I will consume a Defiler, and then I'll have another one out or summon another one. So I have one Defiler, one consumed Defiler, and my Bound Demon. So if we just have a look here, the damage of our Abyss is about 6,500 per second, and then its initial cost is about 3,000 damage, and our Miasma Chains are roughly 5,000 or 4.6 thousand per second, with its initial damage being about 800. Now getting into the play, I'll just quickly buff myself up again so the duration is as long as possible. So diving into how we play now, what you're going to want to do is have your Miasma Bolt, which you can see us firing off here, which kills everything on players 1 perfectly fine, and that is our extra utility skill, just to pop off some extra damage on single target in any tough packs while we are using our other main damaging skills. So it's just a little bit of additive extra damage. And if we just pop a Abyss now, you'll see how quickly that damages and takes down enemies, at least on players 1 here at the moment. And then on the Miasma chain, as I showed earlier, on these chains that you can cast, and you can have 3 up at one time. So what I tend to do is cast an Abyss, I'll cast Miasma chains, and then I'll teleport through the mobs in order to get those chains getting their damage off. So just to sort of show you and concentrate, what I will normally do is, if there's a big mob over here, I will cast a Miasma chain, I'll cast an Abyss on them, and then I'll teleport through the mob to get the chain to do damage, and I'll just keep on adding chains as extra damage and teleporting around so that the chains go through the mob as best as possible. So to just show you that, for instance, there I'm casting my Abyss and I am casting my chains, and I'm just teleporting around to get those chains to go through the mobs. And then you can always add a Sigil Lethargy. I tend to only use this in greater player count games, so players 3 and players 8 and that sort of stuff, because it's not really necessary in players 1, even at this level of gear, because you just simply one-shot everything with your Abyss and your chains. So I think that the sigils come into their own on higher play counts, but just for players 1 like this, you really just need to blast them with your Abyss and then use your chains, as you can see, to sort of go through the mobs and get them down using the combination of Abyss and chains. I mean, even on players 1, you don't have to add in your Miasma bolts even as well. So that's enough sort of discussing and explaining how this all builds. I'll do a bit of play now to show you how that all comes together. So again, just remember sort of the play style and the mechanic of this is to just lay down your Abyss and then get as many Miasma chains down as you can to do as much damage as you can quickly. So let me just show you a little bit more of this Chaos Sanctuary run, just to give you an idea of this Warlock. And like I showed you with the gear, this is by no means optimized and by no means the best in slot version of this build, but it is still incredibly powerful. And I think when you get it right, and sort of when you get your play style down with it, I'm not really playing at maximum potential right now, but I am just sort of giving you an idea. But it really, on players 1, absolutely rips, and I'll put it almost on par with Echoing Strike when it comes to players 1 play, and it sort of only starts to drop off as the player difficulty rises. So on players 8 and even sort of from about players 3 onwards, the monsters become quite a bit harder to kill just in terms of their health pool, but it's by no means weak. It's just not as overpowered as Echoing Strike, and I think that it has excellent single target damage, and then comparing it again to Echoing Strike, it's just a little bit behind because you just don't have that overpowered damage that Echoing Strike has, but you still do have great single target damage as well as AoE, and it drops off a little bit when it comes to higher player count heralds. So there you need to sort of lay down a bunch of chains and teleport back and forth through the herald mob to get their damage down, and whilst you are doing that, you'll also be casting Abyss on the mob in the middle. So you do need to sort of play a bit more tactical with this build and a bit more, what is the word I'm looking for? You need to be, I can't think of the word right now, but you need to be more active in your play style. It's not as lazy as Echoing Strike where you just sort of point and shoot. You have to be a lot more, this word is just completely eluding me, my apologies for that. intentional is what I'm trying to say. You need to be intentional with how you play this. You can't just sort of roughly, randomly play this build. So it does require a bit more concentration, but it is very rewarding in my opinion. And as you can see, even though it's just players 1 year, you really just blast through enemies, and as you can also see there, your mana consumption is relatively high. So I do think that insight is very necessary, and I think Opal Vein providing that mana after each kill is also a very powerful item for this build. And just in general, it's a little bit more nuanced than Echoing Strike, for instance, but I again say it's a lot more rewarding and a lot more fun because it's just different, a little bit off meta, a little bit more consistent in terms of where it stands, and I think how it might be buffed or nerfed in the future. And I think it's about the level of a Hammerdin, if not just behind it. But again, I think after years and years of Diablo 2 and playing the Hammerdin, I think it's exciting to have something new as an alternative now. And I love how this build looks. I think visually it is just stunning. It's really fantastic. And it's just a great overall build that you can do as a starter build playing through the game, or you can play it as an end game version. And once I get those items that I mentioned in terms of being best in slot, I will definitely be doing an updated video showing how this build performs in higher player counts and as an end game variant. I'm very much looking forward to that because the potential that this build has, and like I mentioned, what I'm showing you now is just an example. It is by no means optimized or the best version that you will be able to get with this build. So here for the Bale Waves, we will just cast our Abyss, we'll lay down some chains and teleport through the mobs. And it's also, in my opinion, better than Hammerdin in some ways because you have that ability to do ranged attacks with it. So these are immune to magic monsters, so what I'll do is just cast my Sigil Lethargy and let my Merc and my Demon take those out. And as you can see, they dispatch of those demons or those monsters very quickly. So again, just laying down some chains here, and then I'll teleport through, get the chains doing their damage. Just to note, chains will get broken by walls if you do pass through a wall, so you kind of want to play as much in open spaces as possible. So chains are also a great way to do single target damage by casting your chains on top of a boss or anything of that nature. And they also just in general a great AoE tool when you are moving around. So Enigma is important for this build in my opinion because you want to be able to move your chain where you want very quickly in order to maximize its damage output. That sort of wraps it up for this video. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else. I think that's basically it. I'll just show you Bale here quickly. And I think this is a fantastic build. I am thoroughly enjoying it, especially after playing Echoing Strike for so long. It's such a breath of fresh air and it just feels fantastic. And here we can just see single target on Bale. It's not Echoing Strike fast, but it's no slouch either. And that sort of wraps it up for this. We're going to be doing another competition and giveaway this week that I'm sure I'll make a video tomorrow of. We are going to be doing live streams that we just recently started. We're doing that almost every day, so please join us for some of those live streams. That would be greatly appreciated. You can even join our game and do some terrorized runs with us. Just keep an eye out for the live streams. And then lastly, I also want to do, hopefully on Friday, a video of just the current state of the game and sort of what is good and what is bad in this new Reign of the Warlock expansion. So I hope you enjoyed this Miasma Warlock build guide. It maybe ran a bit longer than I intended and expected. That tends to happen a lot. My apologies for that. At least there will be timestamps in the description. And I really hope you enjoyed it. So we'll catch you again very soon for some more Mana and Motherboards. Cheers!